Park Chan-wook is one of South Korea's best directors of all time. Many will rightfully point to Oscar-winning director Bong Joon-ho as well, which together both have made the films coming out of South Korea for the last 25 years some of my favorite foreign films. One of my current favorite things to have been birthed from this generation to come after the Korean New Wave is the Vengeance Trilogy. Rather than one canonical story, the Vengeance Trilogy, Sympathy for Mr. Vengeance, Oldboy and Lady Vengeance, are linked through the themes of revenge, violence, and salvation. There are also multiple story elements that pop up in the films which make these stories somewhat similar to each other, yet each film is very much worth watching because of another element they all have: reveals. Before we get to the reveals and spoiler territory, let's talk about all the similarities. We have wrongful imprisonment in Oldboy and Lady Vengeance, kidnapping in Mr. Vengeance and Lady Vengeance, violent retribution on behalf of the main characters in all three, violent retribution on behalf of a second important character in Oldboy and Mr. Vengeance, a child being the motivating factor of said vengeance in all three, weighty, violent, and impactful ending in all three. Before we can really dig deeper, we need to delve into spoiler territory. So if you haven't seen these films already, I implore you to do so. But before you go, please be sure to subscribe to the channel. Every subscription helps. I have a lot more videos like this coming up that you're really going to want to be subscribed to the channel to be notified about and to see. Starting with Sympathy for Mr. Vengeance. I love two aspects mainly about this movie. Ryu's luck is unfortunately bad, and the sway of Dong-jin and Ryu into morally gray characters as the story develops. Ryu sees himself fired, utterly taken advantage of by black market organ operators, leads his sister into taking her own life, and then inadvertently sees the death of the daughter he'd kidnapped. Ryu directly and indirectly makes mortal enemies with the likes of Dong-jin, who is the daughter Ryu kidnaps' father. This is where the motivation lies as far as what would you do for your child. But we see this paralleled in Ryu's actions of doing anything for his sister. I find it extremely interesting when we look at Ryu's morality in that his intentions were good from the start. It was mistakes that led to death and destruction, though he is responsible. Ironically, had he made no decisions past the point of working to afford his sister's procedure, everyone would have been whole in this story. But he digs himself a hole, said it again, he never gets out of once he trusts the true antagonists of this story, the black market organ operators. This here states an important message, which is to be careful who we trust and perhaps have faith in the tried process. I can empathize with Ryu, despite his mistakes, as he only wanted to make his sister's suffering end, which makes his conflict with Dong-jin so interesting because both resort to terrible lengths to get what they desire/need. Kidnapping is horrible despite Ryu and his girlfriend Youngmin's justification for it, but in this scenario, they felt the ends justified the means. And as I said, similarity between Sympathy for Mr. Vengeance and Lady Vengeance, they consider themselves to be good kidnappers, where in Lady Vengeance we see Mr. Bake or Mr. Bake to be what they would consider bad kidnappers. When you tie in the guilt and responsibility Ryu has for wasting the money that could have been spent for his sister's operation now that a donor has been found on that black market operation, you can see why he feels so conflicted and compelled to take drastic action. Once Dongjin learns of his daughter's death, he is understandably put on a warpath, which leads him on a one-way course, which will see him collide with Ryu. From here, we see revenge take its course in Ryu dismantling the organ frauds who stole his money and kidney, Dongjin brutally electrocute Young Mi to death, and a head-to-head battle of Ryu and Dongjin. Many interesting things come through all that action mentioned above, but two main things to me that I found interesting are how Ryu is still driven to revenge despite being hunted and more or less down and out. His main motivator is gone, yet he still seeks retribution, and I find that really interesting. I also like that Dongjin's emotions get the best of him with Young Mi, which leads to the surprising and impactful ending of this film. We know Ryu to be directly behind the kidnapping, and his negligence ultimately leads to the death of the daughter, but Young Mi's loyalty to Ryu sees her as the first violent outburst from Dongjin. This first morally corrupted action sees Dongjin die in a revenge killing for what he did to Young Mi at the end through her terrorist group. This speaks to the cyclical nature of violence a la Hammurabi's Code, but also paints our two main characters gray for the killing of two relatively innocent parties who were only in one way or another tangentially connected to the party, the main parties. Again, this shows how messy avenging or vengeance can be. Now, let me kind of address that. Obviously, Ryu wasn't killing, but he showed negligence. So he essentially took on a situation that he was not equipped to take on. Being deaf is not much of a plot point in this film for him besides that major scene. And then Dongjin's is pure in that he just straight up killed someone. It makes you look at them as more gray morally, in my mind, in that they are not pure protagonists anymore for those two main actions. Sympathy for Mr. Vengeance is my second favorite of the trilogy. I gave it a 4.5 out of 5. And if you've only watched Oldboy and you're still watching this and you heard all this, you should really check it out. We are now on to Oldboy, which if you watched my March movie madness video or my 15 more must-watch movies for any movie fan, you would know I greatly enjoy. And you should check those out if you haven't watched them already. Not to take any of the steam away from where Lady Vengeance ranks, but this is my favorite of the trilogy and one of my favorite films of all time. I'm going to spare you with most of the details for this as I did the rating just a few seconds ago, which, well, I'm going to do actually. It's a 5 out of 5 for me. And I'm going to dive straight into the analysis and critical aspects. As a character, Oh Dae-soo is actually introduced to us as a bit of a scumbag before suffering immensely and turning himself into a protagonist in the eyes of the audience through our sympathy of his pain and his resilience to make it through. This is where Park Chan-wook's brilliance comes through, in that he subverts our expectations for a vengeance-based film by the end, but gives us a tell up front that Oh Dae-soo is flawed. When we get to the end of the film, it is unveiled that Dae-soo's imprisonment was a part of a larger plot for vengeance. We can see the full scope, or I guess once we get to the end of the film and see that Dae-soo's imprisonment was a part of a larger vengeance plot on himself, that is when we can see how Park Chan-wook's subversion created this masterpiece. First and foremost, we are all want to root for, or maybe better put, used to rooting for the main character. When we see Dae-soo as obnoxious at the beginning, it is quickly forgotten once we go through his suffering and then badassery. And this gets him on his way towards his revenge already. So we're on board. It almost comes as an afterthought that there must be motivations for Dae-soo's imprisonment, which actually uses the flaw of Dae-soo's character being a drunken idiot at the beginning as a bit of a masking agent to protect what could be behind the big reveal. Chan-wook's pacing is another amazing element, as this film gives us little pieces of the pie before just dropping the big bombs on us almost all at once. Now let's talk about the big reveal. Lee Woo-jin was caught committing incest with Dae-soo, and this moment leads to Lee Woo-jin's sister jumping from a bridge. To get his pound of flesh, Lee Woo-jin has Dae-soo imprisoned until his daughter is old enough to manipulate a situation where Dae-soo unwittingly commits incest himself. The just desserts aspect of this is brilliant, and quite frankly, despite gossip being relatively benign, we should have been more aware that Dae-soo could have created the type of enemy that Lee Woo-jin is, but I wasn't. And maybe that's a bit of an overstatement. We should have expected something crazy like this. Basically, what I'm saying is we should have maybe been aware that it wasn't a false imprisonment scenario as we had been led to believe up until this point. Not only that, but what has seemingly been a tale of revenge for Dae-soo is now fully Lee Woo-jin's tale of vengeance. Another genius twist. We are left with Dae-soo slicing his tongue off for mercy on Woo-jin's part, and Woo-jin taking his own life in the aftermath of it all. What we are left to think about is Dae-soo's commitment to protecting his daughter, who would be hurt just as much as him, if not more, and Woo-jin's, well, she would be hurt just as much, if not more, had she found out, and Woo-jin's utter void of meaning once completing this plot. All in all, there's a ponderance as to the frivolity of revenge, whether it be something we played an unwitting role in to earn it from someone else, like Dae-soo, or that it does not fill the void that has motivated us, like Woo-jin. And maybe most importantly on Dae-soo's part, is that sometimes you run into someone they got more skin in the game than you, which is kind of scary to think about. Last but not least, we have Lady Vengeance, which I rated a 4.5 out of 5 as well as Sympathy for Mr. Vengeance, but is my third favorite of this trilogy. Despite me liking the other two more, this is easily the most stylish of the bunch, with really cool effects, transitions, and cinematography. One of the aspects mentioned just then that I really did appreciate was, or I just thought was cool, quite honestly, is how the film slowly turns into black and white. That I thought was dope. The story sees an angelic woman released from prison after 13 years for a murder and kidnapping she did not commit. Prison sees her turn into a monster that she likely wouldn't have become if not put in that situation, murdering 2 women and planning her revenge on the person who pinned the murder on her. Through her plan, she's reunited with a daughter she had to give up when going to prison, and finds that the real world murderer was a serial child murderer. In the end, Lee Geum-ja is able to round up the families afflicted by Mr. Baek, who is the serial child murderer, to make him suffer like he did their children. But Lee Geum does not feel absolved and does not feel like she can raise her child after the transformation she made to seek this justice. I found the reveal that Mr. Baek was a much more sinister person than we expected to be really, really interesting. Obviously, or not obviously, honestly, the gem of the reveals in this film. I also find that Lee Jum's narrative fits the warning of like vengeance not solving the problem more clearly immediately for me, despite closely mirroring Oldboy. Both Dae-soo and Gyum-ja's obsession with revenge leads them to a place where they can't be there for their children in the future and must make tremendous sacrifices for their children's safety moving forward. Dae-soo's is physical and mental. He must live without a tongue and with his, this mental anguish all by himself to save his daughter. Gyum-ja's retribution felt necessary because of the time she lost with her daughter. That is like her motivating factor. But for both, had they not sought vengeance, they would have found what they ultimately proved to be the most valuable thing to themselves, and that's their children. So we see the lengths that Dae-soo's willing to go for his child, and also we see the lengths that Gyum-ja is willing to go. And yet, at the end of the day, had vengeance not played such a vital role in what they thought the steps they needed to go next, they would have the thing they've shown to be the most valuable to them. So it's I don't know if it's ironic or what you want to call it, but it's ultimately very, very interesting. We also have the families. Try saying that 5 times fast. I bet you probably can, unlike me. We have the families of Mr. Bake's victims who dive headfirst into bloodthirst when face to face with this monster. This is likely to show how easily we can all be tempted towards vengeance once faced with it, and quite honestly, it's understandable for them. Yet, at the end of the day, from Gyum-ja's vision at the end of this film, which I think is meant to represent her guilt for becoming a murderer herself, but also the fact that like this action, it doesn't take away the pain those children felt. It doesn't absolve that. It doesn't erase it. And it doesn't make everything whole again. We can only imagine that the families will not be soothed of their pain or guilt because of this either. All in all, I have to say this is one of my favorite trilogies of all time. I find the way that they explore these themes and first and foremost, vengeance, to be tremendous. On top of that, though, what you're willing to do for, family and child is very, very strongly communicated in this film. Never had I seen something that so astutely and distinctly touched upon topics in a form of a non-canonical trilogy without that through line narratively to keep things together. And it clearly took a ton of thought and genius to pull off. And it's seen in every single movie. And, Oldboy is like a magical movie. And that shouldn't be forgotten either. But also, Sympathy for Mr. Vengeance and Lady Vengeance, which can oftentimes be caught in the shadow of Oldboy, are 2 films that it took me a long time to watch, but were so worth watching. And if there's one point to get out of this whole video, besides maybe the enjoyment of just getting to kind of look through these details again, and you haven't seen those 2, I hope it's that you do watch them. I find Park Chan-wook to be a GOAT, not quite the GOAT yet, for his films, or the films that I've seen so far, and I can't wait to see more of his filmography. Thank you so much for joining me. I hope you enjoyed. Be sure to subscribe to the channel if you like this, like the video. Let me know your thoughts down below, and I will catch you on the flippity floop. Bye, y'all.